I know that truck. I'm no stranger. Welcome to Chuck's Creations. Today we're going to be working on this pristine looking 1996 Ford Ranger. It needs some wheel bearings in the front, and this front driver's side wheel is kicked in at the top for sure, so we know there's probably not much left of one of those bearings. And what we have here is a not great scenario to a normal scenario from one side to the other. So if you need to do this job, you're probably going to want to watch this video. Alright, here we go. Pop the cap, break your lug nuts loose. Let's get this wheel off. I'm not going to tell you how to jack the truck up. I'm going to tell you, make sure you use a jack stand. No matter what you're doing, never trust the jack. So, kind of see how much the wheel is moving here. It's quite a bit. Definitely could use some help. So, let's tear this bad boy apart and see how chewed up these bearings are. So, yeah, it's moving around quite a bit. I'm going to do something a little different than most people when it comes to, you can see the cap was almost falling off. It is caked up with metal filings out there on the outside. Great sign that the outside bearing is toast. And get your cotter pin out. Take the little locking nut cap off. And then I get a hold of a sliver of what was left of the bearing there. This nut is 27 millimeter. It's not very tight, but just tight enough that I used a socket initially there. So when it comes to taking the brake caliper off, so you're going to want to compress the pistons just a little bit. And then I'm not taking the caliper apart. I'm just going to take the whole bracket off because this truck had a brake job pretty recently. I guess they didn't notice the wheel bearings or whatever, but there's no reason for me to take the caliper apart. So two 15 millimeter bolts on the back side here, and your caliper and the caliper bracket comes off in one piece, goes back on just as easy. You just have to make sure that you compress the pistons just a little bit with a screwdriver or a pry bar for ease of reassembly. So now that we got that out of the way, I work the washer around a little bit because the hub is a little bit tied up, but I went ahead and pulled it off there. And what you're going to see is the outside bearing, of course, is toast. The inside one was still somewhat intact. And we're going to work on this for a minute. Trying to evaluate the best scenario here. So normally, you know, I'll tap on it a little bit and see if that inner race, if I can get it to start moving on the spindle. It wasn't moving, and I beat on it pretty good. I danced around it some, and even put a pipe wrench on it for a minute, just see if I could get something to move. And so while I'm taking a break, I'm waiting on a torch. I go ahead and tap the races out of the hub, try to get that cleaned up, get the new races in it so it's ready to reassemble. You can see that I just run my punch across from the inside. You'll feel the edge of that outer race. And I use a couple blocks of wood so I'm not beating up the studs or the rotor itself. And I kind of take my time here and I dance back and forth. Somebody's been in here. There's Chinese bearings in it. And what I'll show you here in a moment, once I flip the rotor over, we'll knock the other race out.
A little bit chewed up.
Sometimes you are going to, end up with little gouges and such if you use a screwdriver or a punch. The punch is pretty rounded, but when I got done with this, there were little gouges on the edge, and I'm not really certain that I put them in there or not. Could have been the last person, it doesn't matter. But I'm going to show you guys what happens when that happens and what you need to do to clean it up so that you have your best chance of your new bearings surviving once you put them in there. So the person that owns this truck, you know, they genuinely care about it. They're trying to fix it up and make it as nice as they can. And so you can see the little gouges in there a little bit. Take some sandpaper, and I'll keep sanding on it until those gouges get below the line of the original machining in this, and that ensures that the new bearing race isn't going to be misshapen whenever you get it back in there. So I got the torch midway through here. I heat this up. I get it as hot as I can. Of course, I'm fast forwarding it and probably cut a little bit out, and I do it a few times, and this race just isn't moving. So we're going to have to go to some extreme measures here in a moment. So I didn't realize that the inner bearing and seal would probably just go over top of the inner race of that outer bearing. But so I'm beating on it all the way around. I'm expecting it to break loose like it possibly normally would, especially on a little truck like this. And so you'll be able to see here shortly the extreme measures I need to go to get this taken apart. So yeah, buddy, this is what's about to go down right here.
Shake hands with danger.
So now that we've shook hands with danger here, I'm going ahead and doing the best I can to not cut too far into the spindle. On this particular spindle, there's a flat side on the threaded part, so I'm cutting on the flat side to ensure that, you know, the threads don't get damaged, and as little as I can cut into the spindle itself. These spindles are a little bit pricey these days, and we're probably better off getting a used one anyway, but I'm going to do my best. So as you can see, this thing friction welded itself to the spindle, and I cut through it and I bang through it here, and it goes ahead and wants to break in half before it comes loose. But once you get to this point, you know you got a little bit of a job in front of you, and I go ahead and tap that other chunk off, and you can see how well it friction welded itself to the spindle. That was pretty impressive. All in all, she was running on no bearing for a while, and so this is what we've got. And spindle is definitely salvageable. We're going to have to clean that up, and so I get some emery cloth out, some medium grit emery cloth, and I work on it, but I don't have very much, so I have to go ahead and get a few different grits of sandpaper out, which is what happens with this. And I'm going ahead and testing to see,
it's like you
know, just how well the bearing, how close I'm getting at cleaning that up. And as I get closer and closer on it, I feel a few spots on there bearing doesn't want to slide on. There's a couple big hunks sticking out, so I take the grinder to it, be real cautious about that. And at a certain point, once I get it sanded down some more, I go ahead and take the bearing and I tap it on there with a socket on the inner race, and of course it's tight, and I'm going to use a punch, and I'm only going to be touching the inner race to get it to pop back off. It's really close, and what that does is it's going to give me some witness marks around the spindle to show me where the high points are. And so I work on it a little more. I see the bearing slides on there pretty easily, but there are just a couple little high spots, and I go ahead and clean those up just a little bit more, get it to an acceptable point, and saving the spindle the best I can. And it looks pretty good. So we're going to put the races in here. I miss using this tool. This is a seal driving tool I picked up at a, like a bargain spot or whatever. And so I use it for a little bit of everything. It comes with a bunch of different adapters and works really great, honestly, for putting these races in. And I also use it for putting the seal in the back side. But not particularly necessary. If you have enough sockets around, or if you don't have any tools at all, you're going to find a method to do this. And, in desperation, you can work back and forth with the punch, I suppose, on each side of the race and slowly put it down in there without getting it too far sideways. So now it's time to repack the new bearings. And I do the best I can wearing these rubber gloves. kind of give you an idea as to how it should be done. You kind of scoop it and roll it into the grease at the same time. Just make sure you get as much grease into those bearings as you can, and put some extra inside of the rotor, put a little bit on the spindle. And so I'm replacing these bearings with National brand bearings. I wanted some Timkins or whatever, but the Nationals were readily available. Honestly, not a big price difference. I mean, you're talking probably like, I don't know, $3 to $5 a piece for Chinese ones versus, I don't know, these are maybe $10, $12 a piece for maybe not made in USA, but a really good quality bearing and possibly made in the United States. And so that was good enough for me. And, you know, for the customer who cares about their vehicle, it was the best case scenario. So got the seal in, got the inside bearing in. Gonna go ahead and get the outside bearing on there, and it is just a tiny bit tight still on that spindle, but that's okay. We're gonna go ahead and tap the washer in. I test it, looks good. So on this nut here, I believe in the book it says to torque it to 18 foot-pounds. As you can see, I tightened it up to approximately that, and I backed it off just a hair. I'm gonna be working on this truck again, and this truck doesn't see a lot of miles, and I will check these in the next couple weeks and go ahead and retest them at 18 foot-pounds. So the cap, a little bit beat up. Let's get her cleaned up, and then I try to straighten it out a bit. You know, this truck is, what is it, 25 years old, 26 years old, and it's seen some things. It doesn't have a ton of miles on it. I think it's 120, 30,000 miles maybe, but somebody's been in there doing some bearings, and they kind of chewed up the cap. And so I straightened this side out really nicely, and as you can see, the caliper slid right back on there with its bracket, caliper and all. Put your two 15mm bolts back in there, tighten them down nicely. Go ahead and check some components. This is how you lock two wrenches together. Some people will cringe at this. It's what I've been doing my whole life. I mean, I'm using some Craftsman tools here, so I'm not overly concerned about chewing my wrenches up. And, you know, if you're working by yourself, you don't have a lot of tools, you don't do this on a regular basis, then this is what you're, you know, some of the methods that you can use to get by with. And so, yes, this tire looking real beautiful.
Shake hands with danger.
So now that we're shaking hands with danger for the second time so far working on this side of the truck, we got her back on there, a little test fit. No, you want to make sure that the dust shield on the back of the rotor isn't touching anything, and I'm testing the front end to see, you know, as the tie rod ends are loose, the bearings are nice and tight from side to side, and everything feels pretty good. There's nothing concerning there immediately for sure. And retorque your lug nuts, and you know what, if you're not sure, you know, go around the lug nuts a couple extra times. You know, don't tighten them down anymore, but make sure that they're all even and they're tight so you don't have any problems. And so, yeah, I'm taking the nut off first before I even take the caliper loose. And it may matter, it may not matter. You may want to use a screwdriver in your caliper to spread it across first before you take all that loose. This is just the method that I use and the order that I did it in. I've done it quite a bit, and so as you can see, it works out just fine. This side, I was originally just going to repack the bearings because there wasn't initially an issue here, but I noticed that, well, they're Chinese bearings on this side, and for as little as the bearings cost and such, and a little bit of extra time, I can beat out the races and put some new bearings in, and the parts store had some new bearings in stock, so let's go ahead and get some new bearings and a new seal in it. You can reuse the seals. I don't know how old these seals were, if the last person reused them, so I'm going to put new seals in these so that, you know, with some quality bearings and new seals, it should be good for a long period of time. And that's really what we're going for. The expense, especially if you're doing this yourself, isn't that bad. You're at the parts store, it's about probably $40 a side. If you order the stuff online, it's maybe even half that. So having new seals is kind of cheap security. You know, keep the water out of there. Make sure you've got a good seal on the inside of that spindle. Repacking these bearings the best I can. Well, not repacking, packing the new bearings. Let's get them in there. Got the new races in. You know, when it comes to putting the seal in, you don't need a seal driver. Just be careful. You can tap on each side of the seal and you will get it seated in there. It honestly just barely fits in the rotor. So let's get the washer, get our nut on there. Approximately 18 foot-pounds. If you're using a regular 3/8 inch ratchet on something like this, it's just a medium amount of force on it. It's going to be about 18 foot-pounds. And so this cap was all chewed up to death. I straighten it out the best I can. I get it back on there. I don't get it near as nice as the other side, but it's going to work. I keep working on it here a little more. Make sure it's going to be fine. I don't know if they still sell new caps at the parts store for this. I know they got trailer ones and stuff, but you know, this is original American metal here potentially, and so try to keep as much quality stuff on here as I can. As you might be able to tell, my voice is a little crackly. I've been a little under the weather and such, but I wanted to get this video out to you guys, and so I got a little treat for you here right at the end of the video. I hope this is helpful, and thanks for watching, guys. I really appreciate it. If you like this content, please consider subscribing. And you may be asking yourself just exactly,
How the hell did you get all this together?
Just happened, mate. You know, piece from here to piece from there.
So easy.
Yeah.
Come on, Max, you've seen it, you've heard it, and you're still asking questions.